Well, one of the highlights of this whole adventure was in building this Frank Lloyd Wright house on the island of Hawaii was that my wife came up with the wonderful idea of making a gathering place for luminaries. And we've all had that experience in our life where we go to this lecture and here is this person of great accomplishment. We're just sitting there going like, I wonder what their life is really like. And so here was one of those opportunities. It was a way that they would come for a week, and people could come and they would pay a fee for the week, and they'd get to hang out with this luminary for the whole week. And the luminary got to come to Hawaii and stay in a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and so it was a kind of a win-win deal. And so there was a list of these people, and they were across the board. One of the more enjoyable, well, they were all enjoyable, and they all had different people following them. For instance, we had Terence McKenna, who was a protege of Timothy Leary, and a lot of people would have thought, you know, well, this is the guy who was just out on a drug trip or something. But Terence was had a photographic mind. He was an ethnobotanist. He was just a genius, and he spoke like a poet. And one of the fascinating things about Terence was that he really was on the journey of inner exploration. He wasn't as much on social experimentation as he was really finding out where these substances took you and then recording that and passing that on for posterity. And I thought he was an authentic person from that point of view. Another person that came was Hank Wesselman. Hank Wesselman was an academician, basically a Berkeley-trained anthropologist who had gone on the great digs in Ethiopia and trying to find the missing link, and it was a fascinating person, but his bent was Hawaiian shamanism, and he actually brought to us practices that we would engage in. If you think about the history of the world, man is 4.5 million years old, and religion is a pretty new item on the scene. I mean, it can be counted in thousands of years, and our existence can be counted in millions of years. And the shamanic world was what was in existence for the vast majority of people. And so we had a chance to actually go through those particular rituals. And one of the things Hank pointed out was that, you know, the shamanic people saw the same pattern no matter where they were, no matter who they were. There was a lower world, middle world, and upper world, and how that happened, who knows, but it was the same picture. And so we actually went through the processes of connecting in those worlds, and Hank was an engaging guy, came back several times, he and his wife, Jill. So they were fascinating. And obviously we had Edgar Mitchell came. Edgar was the sixth man to walk on the moon. A brilliant a scientist. You know, you had to get your PhD in mathematics of lunar landings or something similar to that. In other words, you had to basically, at that time, I guess, according to Edgar, you had to essentially learn the math of how you get on and off the moon. So, but I think the fascinating thing about Edgar is he said that, you know, once you've had that experience, which it's hard for any of us to really imagine, you know, you say to yourself, what's next? And I think he brought to us a real revelation. He said, you know, I probably had been on the greatest outer journey that anybody could have asked for. I mean, what else could you ask for, at least in this particular development of human history? And he said, when I came back, I really realized that it was the inner exploration that would be, you know, that would give me the equivalent. Of course, he went on to develop noetic sciences and so forth, but he was fascinating from that point of view. And of course, we had Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox was the controversial priest who had was really making inroads in spirituality and re-examining the way we work and re-examining the way we relate to our entire existence from that point of view. And of course, it was hard not to remember him saying, you know, basically the Catholic Church excommunicated me, and they didn't even excommunicate Hitler. And he said that just goes to show you how distorted things can get in the world. But he was an engaging person and certainly a highlight. Of course, we all enjoyed Raymond Moody. Raymond Moody was he's a psychiatrist who is known for his work. He'd interviewed, I think, literally thousands of people who'd had near-death experience. The near-death experience was essentially that experience that certain people have had where they've had an accident and they have been, you could say, temporarily dead. And where did they go? And then they come back and they describe that experience. And of course, that's what he was looking for. He was looking for people who had that experience. Where did you go? What was it like? And now you're here. And out of that, he was able to compose for us a very fascinating experience in the house. In ancient Greece, they had these temples called psychomantians, and it was very common. People go to therapy today. They go see their shrink or psychologist or psychotherapist or whatever, priest or you name it. But at that time, they had these temples. They were underground, and you actually went there. You stayed for weeks at a time, low levels of light, and essentially there was a way that they had these pools of oil that were in these large containers, and you would sit there under low light, and you would get these spirits rising, and you would have dialogue. And it was just as common for them to have dialogue back then as it is for us to sit around and shoot the breeze. But we're so far removed from that we can't imagine that reality actually was in existence. And then obviously the counseling was for routine daily problems that we have today. But Raymond was fascinating because he was a psychiatrist and he taught logic at the University of Virginia. And one of the things he said I had to develop my own way of relating to people in terms of logic from the point of view of, he said, for example, the believer and the disbeliever, even though they hold opposite points of view, are one and the same because neither one of them can prove their point of view. And he said, we have that going on. We have wars being fought over religious points of view, which nobody can prove, but they become so ingrained in our culture that we're willing to die. So anyway, he was talking about how he had actually had to find the point of view that he felt described at least a safe place to be, which was to be a non-believer, and that is to say, I'm open to whatever's coming. And Raymond was just a delight. He was a wonderful sense of humor. Everyone enjoyed him. And then we had John Rattenberry, and John and his wife Kay. And John was one of Frank Lloyd Wright's original apprentices. And John had actually supervised the construction of this house that we had, and had lived at Taliesin West, which was Frank Lloyd Wright's home. There was Taliesin West and Taliesin East in Wisconsin. And John just described what it was like living with a mystical genius and growing up and essentially spending he was pretty young when he got there, but he spent 50 years there. And what a life it was. So we had a week with them where they talked about what living in the fellowship was like and living with Frank Lloyd Wright. So these were the kind of people that came through. It felt like a vortex coming through this house, and it almost felt like the house itself had this energy of attraction, and it was a highlight. It was a genuine highlight.